There are different pictures of the world in which we live, the universe in which we live. And according to the religious picture, or the picture which has dominated human thought for at least a couple of thousand years, we live in a cosmos, orderly, purposive, created according to a design, perhaps created according to a blueprint, and the way we should live is to shape our lives, to get instructions from the blueprint, to figure out what according to the blueprint, what our relationship should be with God, or perhaps the gods, our relationship with nature, our relationship with other human beings. The universe is meaningful, it's impregnated with meaning, it's significant. Usually this picture claims that it's harmonious, benevolent. So that's one picture of the universe. The scientific picture has the universe essentially consisting of atoms bouncing around in the void. Things are this way, but they weren't planned this way. They just happen to be this way. They could have been otherwise, and they will be otherwise. Many people find, or claim to find, this scientific picture intolerably bleak, cold. And the sense they have is that if we really are trapped in a universe where there's no meaning out there except the meaning that we create in the universe, but if there's no plan, no blueprint, no coherence, if we are a chaos rather than a cosmos, life would be intolerable and we might as well kill ourselves, or perhaps engage in rape and murder. After all, why would it matter unless there is some purpose, perhaps a divine being willing to punish us if we misbehave, reward us if we behave. The question I want to start with is whether facing up to the reality, because all the evidence points, of course, to the fact that we live in a chaos, not a cosmos, and that whatever meaning and significance there is in the world, we're the ones who create it, who invest it, who uphold it. Is it possible to live without? Thanks. So I move here and I.
You can just turn it off.
Okay. Is it possible to live in the world, and perhaps even not just to exist, but to flourish, to live in the recognition of the fact that the universe is it doesn't have meaning out there that we can grab onto and use as our guide to life. Now, in addition to that grand illusion, I'm calling it an illusion. I won't argue for that, but partly because I expect everyone here agrees, but even if you don't, just grant me the supposition that it's an illusion for the purpose of the next few minutes. Each of us lives with a lot of little illusions of our own. We pretend to ourselves that our wife or husband, our lover, our friends care about us, are as deeply emotionally attached to us as we are to them. If we're teachers, we pretend that our students find what we're saying significant rather than blindingly boring and something you've got to survive in order to get a grade, in order to get a degree, in order to get a job, in order to get a home and tuxedo. Could I live and survive and flourish if I really faced up to the fact that everything I've written and everything I've done in my life really doesn't amount to much, that my colleagues hold me in contempt, that my partner laughs at me behind my back, that my friends, that I'd be better off with enemies. Most of us find, never mind the doctor whose tests show that you've got advanced metastatic cancer and 6 months to live. That would be pretty bleak news. But just to get through everyday life, we pretend to ourselves that we're successful, we're admired, we're respected. Occasionally, glimmers of reality shine through, and we feel depressed. Maybe I'm not so loved or so respected. Maybe everything I've written is crap. and so on. Quite a number of philosophers are divided, and some think that we can't live without illusions, and that therefore the illusions are defensible as a way of armoring ourselves against reality. Or at least some would say ordinary people can't live recognizing and understanding that the universe is not impregnated with meaning, that we live in a meaningful universe, or that our own lives don't have any special significance that that we sometimes pretend our lives have. Perhaps a few great philosophers or intellectuals or particularly courageous people can live in the truth, but most people need the comfort of illusions. And so a lot of people defend religion as they defend other belief systems on the basis that it's comforting and that actually people can't survive, or if they can survive, they can't flourish without the comfort of falsehood, myth, illusion, a picture of reality for which there really either isn't evidence or against which there's a good deal of evidence. I've just cleared my throat. That's the background to the idea I'm going to present to you, because writing about 3/4 of the way through the 19th century, a philosopher called William Kingdon Clifford. Do you teach him, Chris? Yeah. I think he's a wonderful philosopher, on the whole. Wrote an article on the ethics of belief in which he argued that to believe anything, because it comforts you, makes you feel good, sustains you in life, makes life a little less intolerable, is not just epistemically wrong, not just wrong, indefensible intellectually, but he actually sees it as one of the worst crimes you can commit, that it's a moral wrong, that essentially he sees our reliance on illusion, false pictures, as turning us into a kind of walking time bomb. Or to put it a little less dramatically, when we accept things because they make us feel good rather than because we have good evidence for them, Clifford argues that we make ourselves credulous people. And if we're credulous people, if I'll believe the Christian story or the Muslim story or the Jewish story, or if I'll believe anything because it makes me feel good, I'll believe in horoscopes. Millions of people check their horoscopes. Perhaps some of you do. Even quite reputable newspapers publish horoscopes and astrology. No, maybe it's just entertainment, like World Rest. I can't remember the name of it, but everyone knows they're just faking it. But people do. They introduce each other and they say, I'm a Gemini. Oh, well, I'm a Taurus. Our society is, we sometimes talk about this being a secular society, but it's really impregnated with a lot of irrational superstitions. Now, I've given you his conclusion. He thinks it's wicked. And that conclusion, with which I agree, by the way, and I'm going to try very briefly to persuade you, and then I'll stop and take a few questions, comments, criticisms. Almost no one today seems to agree with Clifford. So the atheist will say to the theist, look, I'm not disputing your right to believe that Christ saves, or that Allah is God's prophet, Muhammad is God's prophet, that the Torah or the Quran is the dictated divine word of the ruler of the universe. You can believe that, you just can't force us to teach creationism rather than evolution in our schools. It's fine for you to believe that. We're tolerant of people's believing any kind of superstition, nonsense, irrationality, as long as they don't want to impose it on us. Now, Clifford's conclusion is different. He doesn't think that your belief in horoscopes is innocent. Indeed, for Clifford, there are no innocent beliefs. Innocent as in, it's my right to believe whatever I choose so long as I don't harm anyone else. And part of the reason, indeed the gravamen, the main thrust of his argument, is that you potentially you're causing or you're risking very serious harm to yourself, which is a prudential fault, and to others through your credulity. Clifford says you shouldn't believe anything except those propositions for which you have good evidence. And that the confidence you place in your beliefs should be proportional to the amount of evidence. That we have a duty, a moral duty, to engage in the hard work of, whether it's science or our own life experience, consulting the best evidence available, conscientiously and honestly, honestly as in we're open-minded, willing to accept evidence that contradicts things that we would really like to be true. We've got to be open-minded and conscientious, and only on that basis are we entitled to believe something. And he claims that so the underlying assumption of his argument is that humanity, that the harm, the evil, the cruelty, the tyranny, the pain and the suffering of humanity is a function of our superstitions, our ignorance, and our prejudices, and that superstition, ignorance, and prejudice all consist in people believing things which are false, for which they don't have good evidence. So if you make yourself a superstitious person, okay, so let's imagine a critic saying, oh, all right, Clifford, I agree, at least to some extent, but I can believe something without acting on it. And here Clifford says you can't. If you believe, well, he wants to say two kinds of things. First of all, say, oh, okay, I'm rational, but I do cross my fingers or avoid walking under ladders or feel badly if a black cat crosses my path, or I like to pray every day, but this is just a kind of a sequestered or segregated part of my life. Mostly I'm rational, scientific. Most of how I live is guided by science and reason, and I needn't worry about, it's really no one else's business if I choose to check my horoscope every day. What Clifford says is you can't, if you believe X, and let's say X is something that's superstitious, then you're already conditioning your mind to accept Y, which is kind of like X, and P, Q, and R, and that it's a kind of slippery slope argument that if you're credulous in certain spheres, for example, if you're prone to believe things that are religious, you might end up like some of the parents with whom I deal. I serve as an ethics consultant for the Department of Pediatrics and Child Health at the Health Sciences Center. I sometimes have to deal with parents who will let their child die rather than give them a blood transfusion. Or think of the famous case famous a few years ago, of Terrell Dueck, whose father didn't believe in chemotherapy. He had the same kind of bone cancer in his leg that Terry Fox had, but Terry Fox died from it because there was no treatment. Now 98% can be cured, but Terrell Dueck's father, who was a fundamentalist Christian and who also believed in homeopathy and various kinds of irrational alternative medicine. I mean, homeopathy is just total garbage and crap. There's nothing that could, it's as unworthy of belief as astrology. He took his son to Mexico, and they did their tests and said, no, he's clear of bone cancer. And this child died. Now, the state intervened in his case, but the court case to make the child a ward of the court and impose the child had been completely brainwashed by his father. That's part of the problem. You pass on your superstitions to your kids. And never mind if you're the William Lyon Mackenzie King communicating with his dead mother and his dead dog, and you're in charge of the destiny of a nation and maybe going to send people to war based on God knows what crazy beliefs. Actually, Mackenzie King wasn't such a bad prime minister. We've had worse. But even if you're just, you're not a teacher spreading irrationality and superstition, you're just an ordinary guy or an ordinary woman in the pub sharing your infecting others. He sees it as he sees irrationality, he sees credulity as a kind of infection. And just as The courts are now treating it as a criminal offense, a serious assault, maybe even manslaughter or murder if I have AIDS and I don't tell my partner and I have unprotected sex with her. I mean, the penis can be a lethal weapon. So can the vagina in that circumstance. And people are now, I think rightly, although there's an argument that the criminal law is not the right instrument to use, rightly being prosecuted for spreading infection. Similarly, if you're irrational, there's no such thing as an innocent religious belief if religion is irrational. And the kind of... I'm going to conclude with a quick anecdote. I think I've really presented you with the essence of the argument, although there are 1,000 subtleties. Maybe we'll explore a few of those in the question period. And I want to conclude with a brief personal anecdote. In 1970, I just returned from England. I taught a couple of years previously at the University of Manitoba, and I went off to England thinking I would live there permanently and do research there, teach there. I was offered a job. I came back, and bang, very shortly after I returned, in 1970, Pierre Elliott Trudeau declared the War Measures Act in Canada. Ancient history, probably most of you weren't born in 1970. Actually, most of you weren't born in 1980. But you've heard of the War Measures. You know, so they suspended civil liberties right across the country. In Winnipeg, the Manitoban, the student newspaper of the University of Manitoba, it became a crime, by the way, even to publish the FLQ manifesto. The Manitoban published it in an edition of many extra thousands distributed to downtown. They could have gone to prison. Dimension Books in Osborne Village had a poster that said "Viva l'FLQ." The RCMP came and took it down. Pretty minor stuff. In Quebec, hundreds and hundreds of people, including the prominent folk singer Pauline Julien, a number of writers and artists were imprisoned, basically because they were séparatistes, not because they were terrorists. But you could be imprisoned without charge. And you could be kept for 90 days, and then it could be renewed for another 90 days, and then for another 90 days. So we lost habeas corpus, we lost the right to trial, we lost the right to our freedom unless they charge us with something, and then we can appear in court and defend it. This was really serious. It was Trudeau's most popular moment. In Parliament, the New Democrats voted against it, and one Conservative, David MacDonald, who in my eyes is a kind of hero. I mean, it really takes guts when everyone else in your group is taking one view. All the Liberals, all the Conservatives, except for David MacDonald, and the whole country was, as I say, Trudeau's popularity was in the 90%. I got death threats at this time. There was a campaign to have me fired. The reason I'm telling this story is because the War Measures Act can only be invoked if there's an apprehended insurrection. The evidence for an apprehended insurrection was 2 kidnappings. The murder of Pierre Laporte came after. Actually, it came on the... I gave a speech defending civil liberties on a Saturday afternoon. That night, Pierre Laporte was murdered, and my God, Free Press denounced me. I was a friend of terrorists, and I was, in fact, in one column, their lead columnist, Sean Heron, said, Schafer's so busy defending terrorism, he doesn't have time to meet his classes, or his 8:30 Monday morning class. I mean, he just fabricated that. I had no 8:30 Monday morning class. I hadn't failed to meet any classes, though the next week I did. I just forgot. Well, how could it be that, I mean, there are societies, there are countries in which there's near civil war and bombs going off and marches in the street. Think of France, May of '68, workers occupying the Renault factory, students in the street, even students from elite schools flying the red flag. In Canada, we had 2 kidnappings. There are probably 50 kidnappings every weekend in Montreal. And not to say gangland murders. And Canadians, based on really almost zero evidence, immediately were willing to approve of the relinquishing our civil liberties because we needed law and order. So my conclusion was this willingness to believe what our rulers tell us. I mean, they all lie. And especially they lie about wars. We're talking on a day when WikiLeaks is I think that's heroic. Obama's lying. Every president, every prime minister, not just tin pot dictators and tyrants, tells massive lies, and most people are so credulous they believe them. That affects our destiny. It's very easy to confuse people. We are not primarily a skeptical, rational, there I introduced the word skepticism to honor the occasion, society, but our survival, never mind our flourishing as a species, hinges on our diligently, conscientiously looking for evidence for our beliefs. We can't always wait till we've got decisive knowledge. In the case of global warming, on the balance of probabilities, we face extinction. Sometimes you have to act on probability. Do you have to pretend that you have certainty? Will people not act unless you exaggerate the level of the evidence? There's a question to put to ourselves and to others. Can we really live useful, effective lives if living with uncertainty? Because there is so much that's uncertain and so little that's certain, and many psychologists and many people in the field of medicine, where I do a lot of my research and writing and consulting, believe that people fall apart when they're confronted with uncertainty, that they need to have confidence in their doctor. Doctor knows best. If you really understood your prognosis and how much, plus or minus, what the range of uncertainty is, even with the diagnosis, never mind the treatments, almost all of which are virtually useless and many of which are much more harmful than useful, based on the evidence. I mean, the doctors are taken in by, really they practice in North America what I call pseudo-evidence-based medicine. This is really what I do my own research in, is I do research about medical research. And there we're talking about drug company influence. If you don't have a healthy skepticism, you're really sunk. And as a society, we don't have nearly enough. That's my thesis, and I think William Kingdon Clifford, you can Google him, Clifford, or take Chris's class where Clifford is taught. I think he's got it right, and those who feel liberal tolerance towards those who are superstitious and irrational have got it wrong. It isn't permissible to believe whatever makes you feel good, right? You feel good believing this, okay, I don't, right? It's kind of like stealing from your fellow citizens by making yourself credulous and thereby the sort of person who will believe Harper or Sam Cates or any of the other wicked people in our society. I've just stopped. Questions, comments, criticisms?
You can go first.
Okay. Well, talking about the notion of tolerance and how Clifford said that he sort of said that people are generally tolerant of others who have irrational beliefs but don't harm anyone else, and that's the wrong position to take. I think it's actually worse than that. I think people are tolerant of people who act on irrational beliefs and impose them on others. This is like really fresh in my mind. I don't know if you heard about the Victaves protest and then valedictorian speech.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Were you there?
Yeah, I was one of the organizers of the protest. So...
Good for you.
And I don't know if you've read Linda Reynolds' column
I did.
in response to it.
No, I read the other one.
Oh, good. Don't bother.
I didn't bother with
Linda Reynolds.
Linda Reynolds'
It's
column.
just a general rule.
Right. But there's a really strong sense that being intolerant of intolerance is wrong.
Yeah.
Not only specifically in marring, as the Winnipeg Sun put it, the sacred right of convocation, and that although the argument is Aaron injected politics into that ceremony, even though the politics was there when Axworthy decided that Victaves was worthy of an honorary degree. But besides that, so it's bad there, but it's also just bad in general to ever say that hating gay people is wrong. Like, there's comments on the Uniter newspaper website that say that I'm trying to argue with these people and say some ideas are right, some ideas are wrong, most fall in the middle, and you can sort of make arguments about them. But the question of whether or not gay people, or let's just narrow it down to gay people. The gay people should be offered every right and privilege that every other non-gay person in Canada is offered. That's kind of just a fundamental truth, I think, that we should all be able to agree on and speak out against anyone who disagrees with that. But people come back and say, I thought the point of a liberal education was to say that there are no truths, everything's a gray issue, and that you are being intolerant by speaking out against Vic Taves' beliefs.
Yeah, I'll just so tack on to your comment a distinction between being closed-minded at the one extreme, being porous-minded, where you're willing to accept any belief regardless of the evidence for its truth, and being open-minded. And there is this feeling, I think you're right, that everyone's you're entitled to be a bigot, and I'm entitled to be.
Laws that
that's right.
that bigotry
And
on
look,
others.
you were rude. You embarrassed him. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm actually going to go the opposite way with this one. So, like, I like Clifford's idea, but isn't it a tad bit unpractical when you consider things like, now, someone here no doubt can give me the names of the actual studies. I'm looking at you, Jim. There have been studies that have shown that people who don't think rationally and aren't able to see flaws in their own arguments, that, like, essentially, if you are stupid, you are not smart enough to realize that you are stupid.
Exactly.
And likewise, there are studies that have shown that if you are presented evidence that contradicts with your evidence, you will more strongly believe your own evidence. So from a practical standpoint, wouldn't it be a bit dangerous to suggest that we should be very harsh on anyone who is thinking these things that are... Now, I'm going to agree that if you're not thinking rationally, you are thinking wrong. I'm not going to deny that, but there are enough people out there who don't or possibly cannot think in a rational manner. Wouldn't it be dangerous to suggest that we should be militant about our own beliefs in case there's more of them, and then they win out, and then
They
you're
get
the
more
ones...
militant about their irrationality?
Yeah.
So there's a very quick answer to that question, and it's not one to which I addressed my remarks.
Okay.
So you're asking the question: if you accept the important ideas that Clifford's putting forward as being true and significant, what should you do? And it might well be you should shut up, because if you propound them, you'll make the situation worse. You need evidence, which is Clifford's point. How you should proceed, whether it's better to whether you created more animosity to liberal ideas and acceptance of the rights of homosexuals, or whether you created more tolerance or more intolerance, whether you educated people or entrenched them in their prejudices, is an open question. I don't know. My own hunch is, my own sense is that we need lots of questioning and challenge in school, in our neighborhoods, in our own families. But if someone produces psychological studies that show that any one of the things that I think would be effective isn't effective, and that something else is, and if the goal is to change people's way of thinking or to change their way of behaving, or if there are other risks, a fascist backlash or whatever, then of course Clifford would say, well, look at the evidence, and believing something to be true doesn't mean that you believe that you should say it in any given occasion, or that you should say it at a convocation. I actually think it was great that you did, but someone could argue that it wasn't, and then we'd have to look at the evidence. And then next time, when the U of M is honoring some unsavory person, we'd have to look at that evidence and try to decide whether the best thing to do is to placard or demonstrate, or for the valedictorian to speak. My hunch is that it was educative, but I'm not sure about that. I'm sure you're right in your beliefs. Whether what you did was effective or not, that's a separate question. And for that, you need empirical evidence. You need to know about this society at this time, and how people generally react. And sometimes coming on all cannons firing isn't an effective way to persuade people. Being friendly, smiling, insinuating yourself, maybe even tricking them into, maybe even the use of deception might sometimes be, the roundabout. Those are all separate questions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Would Clifford say that having a correct belief, but with bad reasons, is also morally bad?
He does. He says this explicitly. He says, suppose I end up with, I persuade myself. He uses the example of a ship owner. Do you remember that? He uses it beautifully. I'm a ship owner, and I've got this rusty old ship that looks as if it's not seaworthy. And the cost of repairing it and making it seaworthy would be quite substantial, and maybe it does have a few more. So I genuinely, if you want to believe something, you can persuade yourself. We've all had this experience. We persuade ourselves to believe something. So the ship owner persuades himself that the ship is really seaworthy, and thereby saves himself the expense of, the hundreds of thousands of pounds or millions of hundreds of thousands, it would have been in Clifford's day, millions today, of repairs are not really necessary, and he sends the ship out to sea. Now, suppose the ship sinks. Clifford said, clearly he's guilty of the murder of those men. But suppose his belief turns out to be true, and that against all the evidence, the ship doesn't sink and arrives safely, and he saved the money, and the immigrants who are going to the New World all arrive happily, and so on and so forth. He's still guilty, says Clifford. He's as guilty as if it went down, because his belief was based not on the best evidence available, but on his refusal to look at that best evidence for his own comfort and the fatness of his wallet. So it's not so much whether you believe, you can, life is short. You can only investigate so much. At some point you act on probability. You can get it wrong. And a person who acts on superstition can get it right. But on the whole, in general, you're more likely to get it right if you're conscientious. That's his point. Could I just make one final point? And I've already trespassed a bit into the next speaker on the agenda, and so I apologize for that. And I'll just make one final point, and it's one that Clifford anticipates in The Ethics of Belief. I'll call it the theory of the little engine that could, on the supposition that you all know that child story. So this, it's Christmas, and the big engine has gone down, and the little engine has to deliver the toys, and it has to go over a mountain, and it's chugging up the mountain, but it's underpowered. And but as it's chugging up the mountain, I remember reading this story to my kids when they were young. They're all nearing retirement. They're both nearing retirement age now. But so the little engine is saying, remember? I think I can. So if you go into a job interview thinking, I'll never get this job, if you go into a football game thinking, my God, we do nothing but lose, and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers playing this afternoon, for sure we'll lose a game. Chances are that can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and so can believing that you'll succeed. If I meet you on the street, you're a stranger. If I think, this is a pretty unfriendly city, so I just walk by you as if I don't see you. And then, of course, you'll be unfriendly. On the other hand, if you assume, perhaps against the evidence, that other people are friendly and you greet them with a smile, that may be self-fulfilling, and you may your non-rational or your not evidence-based belief that you'll succeed may actually help you to succeed. So there are some circumstances in which it looks as if you might be but of course the question is, do we have evidence to believe that our own attitudes to our disease, or to whether other people will be friendly, or to our abilities, if you teach someone to think that they're stupid, you can stupefy them. And if someone feels confident, maybe they'll bring out the best, and maybe even better than the best. But we've got evidence for that. So behaving in this way is not behaving against the evidence, it's behaving according to it. Anyway, this is kind of a superficial, an important last point in the superficial treatment of it. But thanks for listening, and thanks for inviting me. I interrupted a family picnic, so I've got to dash back, and hope that they'll forgive me for failing in my duty to my granddaughter and son. But I wish you every success, and I'm
really thrilled that I didn't know that there was a Winnipeg Skeptical Society, but I'm delighted to know that there is, and that there are people who really care about rationality and truth and falsehood. So.